Welcome to my tier list of the Wheel of Time books after a first read through. There'll be hot takes, some not so hot takes. This is just my impressions of what I was feeling at the time of reading it through and some of my thoughts on how the books are afterwards. I'm going to jump in here before we get into the actual rankings and say like and subscribe if you enjoy. I want to do a character analysis on Rand. I've started writing it, but it's kind of hard. Let me know if you guys are interested in that. Onto the video. Starting off with New Spring, I've got to say I read this book at the absolute wrong time. I was hitting the end of the plot sequences and it got thrown in there, and it was just like a total slowdown to my reading pace and like the way I was feeling. So this is probably a cruel low ranking, but it's just how I felt about it when I was reading and finishing it, which is C tier. Moving on, we have The Eye of the World, of which I would rank much higher now. But this book took me a month to get through. It was very dense, very slog-like for me in the first part. I look back on it very fondly, and like I wanted to immediately jump into like rereading again when I was on like book 11. But after finishing it and the first time through, I have to put this in B tier. Moving on, we have The Great Hunt, which I was invested in the series, but looking back on it especially, I think it was a sideways movement, if not a little lower than The Eye of the World. Even though I got through it faster and I enjoyed it more, I think it is a little bit worse than Eye of the World. Dragon Reborn is where things start to pick up. This is where I got hooked and I said, okay, I'm down for 14-15 books of Wheel of Time. And this is my first A tier ranking. I have to say that this book, especially the ending, really set the scale for me. I loved the little Aiel bits, and every character, Perrin, Mat, and Rand, had their part to play, and I enjoyed it so thoroughly. Moving on to our first S tier, no surprise, we have The Shadow Rising. Although the first 200 pages, 300 pages took me a little bit, after that, I was flipping through. I was doing so many pages a day just because I couldn't get enough of what was going on between Mat, Egwene, Rand, Perrin. Perrin has his best moments in this book. This is where you get Perrin baited for the rest of the season. You're like, this guy is going to be awesome, and then he doesn't do a whole lot until the end. But this is everything about Robert Jordan's writing, firing on all cylinders for every character. I couldn't get enough of this book. Next, we have Fires of Heaven, which I have to place as an A+ book. Slightly worse than Shadow Rising because of there's certain parts where it's not firing on all cylinders, and the culmination of events isn't quite as good. Even though the Raven fight and the death of Moiraine is very heartbreaking, it's just a little bit below it. I made an A+ tier because I very much want to distinguish the best of the best from almost there, because there are those slight things that make a book that much better. Next, we have Lord of Chaos, which I will be putting above The Dragon Reborn in A tier. It's nearly at the A+ tier with Fires of Heaven, but there is a lot more of dallying around before you get to the box sequence in Dumai Wells. I have to say those make up for those parts, and which is why it lands in A tier, but there is a bit of like doing this, doing that, nothing getting done a whole lot. But eventually you get to an amazing sequence between those two moments. And then we have Crown of Swords, which this may be a hot take, but it's still A tier. It's above The Dragon Reborn. People say this is where the slog starts, and I can kind of see it, but I was enjoying the things from Rand and Samael and their back and forth, to the Ebu Dar stuff, to the Saladar stuff. Everything that was going on, I was decently intrigued in and overall enjoyed, but it goes on a lower spot than Lord of Chaos because the ending events aren't quite as good, and there is even more dragging in the start of the slog. I have to say, these books do get knocked down a little bit in my book when there are those slow parts that you have to really like focus up to read and your eyes start drifting off the page. Next up is Path of Daggers, and this is where I would say the books take a step down from the pace that they were at. Books 1 through 7, especially 3 through 7, I was completely on board and just vibing hard. And then this is where I got hit with wait a minute, there might be something to the slog, but still good. I put this Path of Daggers at C tier above New Spring. What really suffers in this book is Perrin's stuff with Massima, the whole girls thing with the kin and the Athan Mir and that whole ish. it just was kind of not amazing for me, and Solidar slows down quite a lot, leaving it in a C tier. Next up, we have Winter's Heart, which goes, yet again, below Path of Dag. Winter's Heart would be so much lower if it wasn't for the cleansing of the source and the whole ending sequence inside Farmadian, which I wish there was a little bit more of. I think I touched on that in my review, but that does make up for a lot of the lollygagging and the standing around and talking that goes on, which I do enjoy those moments, but compared to how it's done in previous books, it's not quite as good. And now we have the least controversial opinion of all time of putting Crossroads of Twilight at a D tier. This book was literally just them talking over stuff that happened in the previous books and being like, oh, what is going on? And nothing of real substance happens. This book was most definitely my least favorite. Was a quick read, I will give it that much, but going at the bottom, a D tier book. But that's on Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time standards, not on the worldwide standards of books. Now we have Knife of Dreams, Robert Jordan's bounce back book after having a little bit of a down slope. And I put this at B tier. I have to say I'm debating between above Eye of the World or below Eye of the World. I think I might put it above. This is just like, I gotta go off of what I was feeling at the time. And the whole sequences with Rand and Lews Therin fighting against each other, Egwene with the siege, and Perrin finally killing the Shadow and getting that plot over with, thank God. And then Mat discovers that Moiraine is alive. There's like so much in this book to where it really is kind of set up for farther books that will rank higher, but it's so well done, and I'm glad Robert Jordan got this out before he went. And now we get to maybe my most controversial opinion. The Gathering Storm takes the #1 spot in S tier. To this second, I am debating back and forth of whether to put Shadow Rising above it or keep Gathering Storm there. But the character moments between Rand, Mat, Egwene, Perrin, and the Wolf Dream, everything is just going so well in this book. I love this book. This is one of my favorite books of all time, along with The Shadow Rising. The ending moments of Rand on Dragonmount and Egwene fighting the Shan-Chan, it just pulls together so well. After my first read through, I have to put it up there. That and Shadow Rising are just such amazing books. Now we have Towers of Midnight, which I thoroughly enjoyed, but the timing of things and the way that Perrin's story interconnects with Gathering Storm should have been a bit different in the timeline, and that jarred me a bit. But besides the bit of timing, this book is so good. Whether it be Perrin in the Wolf Dream and Egwene trying to find one of the Forsaken, or Elaine and Mat in Andor until Mat goes to the Tower of Genji, and Rand finally at peace and doing what he needs to do for the last battle. It was such a good read besides those timing issues. The biggest one I had a problem with is I thought Perrin's scene when he saw Rand on Dragonmount would have hit so much harder if in the moment we hadn't known the conclusion of that and it all turned out okay. But that was still amazing despite knowing that Rand turns out okay. And finally, we have A Memory of Light, and this ends up in D tier. I hated this book, just kidding. It's top of A+ tier. It had some of the most moving moments in the series. Some of my favorite things that happen. It's just little moments here and there that put it slightly below that S tier for me. Nothing bad, but things such as like Egwene's moment of death was so wonderful, but her connection to Mazrim Taim just like wasn't that great. Just tiny things that end up bringing it down just that couple points to top of the A+ tier, which is still one of the best books I've read of all time. Looking at my list, really the only thing I have to debate is still Shadow Rising Gathering Storm, but I feel like I have to stick by my word because those first 200-300 pages of Shadow Rising took me a little bit longer to get through, but after that, it was just perfection. But I have to put The Gathering Storm as the best Wheel of Time book after my first read through. I expect to think back on this list and be like, well, what the hell was I thinking? After I go through this series again and realize that I'm an idiot.